Darkness. It's all I had known. Well, maybe that's not quite true. I guess I've known a lot of things in my life. Ridicule, hunger, extreme heat, extreme cold, shame, confusion, doubt. But the darkness, that was the worst of all. Perhaps it's because no matter what else was going on, the darkness was always there, an all-consuming presence. And yes, I did say presence. Most of you might think that darkness is just the absence of light, but I'm here to tell you from my years lived within it that darkness is a very real and living entity. Darkness. I lived my days and my nights within its arms, unable to escape, not by choice, you see, but by circumstance. 41 years ago, I was brought into this world. And while my mother and father wanted nothing more than a happy and healthy baby, what they received was a soul destined to be an outcast from the start. A child who would never see the light of day. For years I lived in shame. Was it my fault? What had I done in some state of pre-existence to warrant such punishment? I spent many hours on my knees begging God to give me my sight. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. To be honest, I wasn't even sure I really knew the God to whom I was praying, nor was I sure I could trust this God. After all, wasn't Yahweh the one who had done this to me? Nevertheless, I prayed. I wanted to be like the great heroes of my faith, like my ancestors, like Abraham, who saw a fruitful land with the potential to hold a great nation. Like Moses, who saw the power of God part the Red Sea so that God's children could walk through it. Like Jacob, who saw a ladder of blessing connecting heaven and earth. Like Isaiah, who saw God's glory fill the temple. I wasn't asking for any of these things. I just wanted to see my mother's face and my father's eyes. As time passed, I did the only thing I could do to earn my way in the world. I begged. I begged God for my sight when I was a little boy, and now my begging was done before men. I begged outside of the temple walls. You see, I found that this strategy helped me to play on people's sense of religious duty. For they would give out of a sense of guilt for some sin they had committed, or others would give because they believed themselves to be so righteous, and they wanted God and everybody else to see it as they dropped a coin into my basket. I didn't really care why they gave. I just figured that if they wouldn't give me my dignity, they could at least give me their spare change. That was my life. It wasn't much, but it's all that I had. It was my only option. Day after day, begging, pleading for pity, hearing the criticisms, hearing the scoffing, feeling degraded, and feeling alone. Until that day. I heard a crowd coming my way, and as they drew closer, I heard a man speak up and ask, "Rabbi, who sinned that this man was born blind? Was it him or his parents?" Well, immediately I felt anger rise up within me. You see, this would happen quite often. Rabbis and other learned folks would come my way, and they would pontificate upon my situation without throwing anything my way in return. I braced myself for the rabbi's typical response to that question, but all I heard was silence, a long pause. I knew that the crowd was still there. I could hear the shuffling of feet. I could feel them breathing. And in the distance, I heard some rumblings about this man that they were calling Jesus. After what seemed like several minutes, the rabbi came and he knelt before me. I could feel his breath not far from mine. And then I heard him say this: "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but now you will see God glorified." What happened next happened so quickly that I can barely recall it with words, yet every moment has been etched as a permanent memory on my mind. I heard him spit into the ground. And seconds later, I felt a cold and wet substance touch my eyes. I'll never forget how it felt. It was cool and damp, yet at the same time, it felt as though someone was just pouring heat into my body. And then the command was given: "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." This command caught me somewhat by surprise. After all, the pool was a good 500 yards from where I'd been begging. Not an easy journey for a blind man to make. Nevertheless, out of a sense of compulsion, I guess, I picked up my trusty walking stick and I began this journey to the waters. And it wasn't an easy 500 yards, I can tell you that. There were those mocking me along the way. "Hey, blind man, you have mud all over your face. Did you accidentally eat with the pigs again?" Well, never mind all of that. I continued my journey to the side of the pool and began my slow descent into the waters. Now, you might think that I plunged right into the pool, anxious to get the mud cleaned from my eyes, but I hesitated. I knew that this was more than just a facial cleansing. I somehow knew that these waters were going to change me forever. Did I want that? What was going to happen to me, and what might this rabbi require in return? The thought of opening my eyes to a new world was an intimidating prospect. You see, I think we all have a tendency to seek the comfortable and the familiar, even when it is a limited existence. Blindness can be a very comfortable and familiar way to get by. But within myself, I felt my heart cry out that it was time to do more than just get by, that it was time to live. It was time to experience a life of sight and of hope, of joy, of normalcy. And so I immersed myself into the water, not so much in an act of assured faith, more like a last-ditch effort. I lifted my head from the waters and I was terrified. Darkness I was used to, but this light was something quite new. And for a moment I panicked and I thought, I've made a terrible mistake. I tried to make my way out of the pool, splashing, searching for the steps. But as I approached them, I began to notice something. Black lines, horizontal, parallel. I was seeing. For the first time in my life, I was seeing something, and my mind was figuring out what it was. It was the steps. I drew closer and closer to them, and the closer I got, the clearer they became. My eyes were being opened to this gift of sight, and the world around me was connecting to me for the first time in a new way. The minutes began to fly by as my vision grew clearer and clearer, and I was seeing all types of things like dirt and grass and houses and donkeys and children. By the time I arrived on my street, my neighbors were astonished as they saw me walking confidently along the way, minus that trusty walking stick. I was so excited when they said to me that we go to the synagogue to show the leaders what had happened. Finally, I would be able to enter into the place of my faith and see the glory of my heritage with my own eyes. Oftentimes in my life, I had questioned God and the faith of my ancestors, but now I knew that God had touched me, and so all I wanted to do was enter into the house of worship, to behold with my own eyes the scriptures, the scrolls, the candles, the horns, the oils. But the glory of these outward spiritual signs was quickly diminished by what I really saw in that place. For what I saw was hatred and fear. Instead of my newfound sight being celebrated, I was questioned. I was viewed as an enemy of the faith. They demanded to know exactly who I thought this Jesus was. I didn't know a thing about him. Who he was or from where he came. All I knew was that he had given me my sight. This man, this Jesus, was being accused of being a sinner, a false prophet, an enemy of God. All I knew was that once I was blind, he touched my eyes and now I could see. All I knew was that once I walked in total isolation, but now I had a friend. The place that I had longed to enter into for so many years was now the place from which I wanted to run and run quickly. I wanted to be back outside. Outside is where God met me. Inside, God was being put on trial. And outside is exactly where Jesus met me again. And in the moment that his eyes connected with mine, I knew that I was beholding the very face of God. I knew that I was being welcomed into a divine friendship. Even my great ancestors never got to see that. But here he was, right in front of me. You know, I always thought that in order to see God, I would have to look to the heavens. Never did I imagine that my first encounter with God would be when God would stoop in front of me and get his hands dirty in the mud. Never did I imagine that the first time I would see God, that it would be at eye level. But when his eyes met mine, it was like a streak of lightning into my very being. And in that moment, I realized that Jesus didn't just give me sight, he gave me vision. All of those years I had been praying that God would restore to me a physical sense of sight, but what Jesus gave me was spiritual insight and the calling to declare the truth to all. And through friendship with the divine, he gives me the strength I need to testify to this one truth. I once was blind, but now I see. For 41 years, I had been the man born blind. Nothing more than that. In fact, when I first returned from the pool, my neighbors weren't even sure that it was me. You see, for all of those years passing by me, they never really stopped to look at me. Even Jesus' own disciples viewed me as nothing more than a theological debate, but not Jesus. He saw me as more. He saw me as a person in need of divine mercy. He saw me as a person who could play a part in the divine revelation of who God is. Everyone else saw my blindness as punishment for my sin, but Jesus saw my blindness as a pathway for God's revelation and as an opening for discipleship. And that is vision. To see below the surface of a person, to see beyond their sin and suffering into who he has always been made to be. Now, I've lived on the streets long enough to sense that there's a change in the air. And I hear enough of the town gossip to know that there's something going on between Rome and the temple. My sight grows brighter and brighter each day, yet the world around me seems to be getting darker and darker. They're angry at Jesus, and they're threatened by his following. There are even rumors that they're going to arrest him soon. They're just waiting for the right time. What will happen to him, I don't know. And who this man Jesus really is, I may never understand. But I've learned something about faith, that faith is not just about correct theology. Faith is not even about certainty about God. Faith is simply about loving God. My faith is in the one who stooped in front of me to give me the gift of sight, to give me the gift of vision, to give me the gift of seeing the face of God, to give me the gift of seeing myself in a place in God's kingdom. Not a kingdom of manipulation or power, of politics or religion, but a kingdom of love and compassion, of cleansing, of vision, of friendship, of discipleship. And so my question for you is this: have your eyes been touched? Can you see? Not the birds or the trees or the faces of children. Can you see him? Can you see God's kingdom? Have you asked God to be revealed in your life? Who exactly this man Jesus is, I may never really know. But I tell you the truth. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.